Welcome, shadow dwellers. Tonight we reveal the dark side of the holiday we all love, with 3 true Halloween horror stories. These aren't just tales, they're accounts from real people, from parents and their children to teenagers and trusted friends, who stumbled into the heart of a nightmare when they least expected it. First, a family discovers their new, perfect small town has a sinister secret it keeps from outsiders. Next, a young woman's night of fun and costumes ends with a terrifying realization about who she truly walked home with. And finally, a boy on his trick-or-treating rounds learns a devastating truth about a kind neighbor he thought he knew. These chilling encounters are inspired by real events and are proof that sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones that don't need a costume at all. So turn off the lights, hit that subscribe button, and prepare for a night you won't soon forget. Jamie and his family arrived in the small Louisiana town as the first hints of autumn began to touch the air. The long drive had been a blur of highways and cramped motel rooms, and the sight of their new home, a 2-story Victorian with a wide wraparound porch, felt like the finish line of a marathon. The air was different here, thick with the smell of damp earth and sweet magnolia, a stark contrast to the exhaust fumes of the city. As a software engineer used to the relentless pace of Silicon Valley, Jamie was chasing a quiet life, a place where his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, could have a classic small-town childhood. With Halloween just around the corner, an event Lily had been excitedly chattering about for months, it felt like the perfect time to start fresh. Their new house was full of character, from the way the old floorboards groaned to the soft, dusty light that filtered through the wavy glass of the original windows. As they explored the rooms, their voices echoing in the empty space, they felt a shared sense of profound relief. This was it, the escape they had dreamed of. The town's welcome was immediate. The most welcoming was their neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a man with a kind smile who seemed to be a pillar of the community. He appeared on their lawn the first day, his hands already dirty from his own garden. "Welcome, folks," he'd said, his voice warm. "We're so glad to have you. Anything you need, you just give a holler." He brought them a still warm pecan pie and later helped Jamie wrestle a rusty old lawnmower into submission. His questions felt like simple, small-town curiosity at the time. He asked about their jobs, their family history, where their parents were from. "It's always nice to know your neighbor's roots," he'd said with a disarming chuckle. The first few weeks were an idyllic dream. Sarah started a garden, her hands happily covered in dark, rich soil. Jamie set up his home office in a spare bedroom, overlooking the quiet, oak-lined street, the gentle pace of the town, a soothing balm on his frayed nerves. They spent a whole Saturday carving pumpkins they'd bought from a local farm stand, the scent of cinnamon and pumpkin guts filling their new kitchen. Lily spent her afternoons on the porch swing, drawing endless pictures of herself in the astronaut costume she planned to wear for Halloween. They were happy, completely and utterly, cocooned in the town's warm, festive embrace. The first hint of something being off was a single off-key note in an otherwise perfect melody. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and Jamie was watching Lily play in the front yard. He saw a kid, maybe 10 years old, standing at the edge of their property where the lawn met the dark woods. The kid was wearing a big plastic horsehead mask. It wasn't a cheap Halloween costume. It was made of a thick, rigid plastic, its painted-on smile wide and disturbingly fixed. The eyes were just vacant black holes. Jamie, still full of the town's good cheer, gave a friendly wave. The horse-headed kid didn't move. It just stood there, perfectly still. Jamie felt a flicker of unease, a primal sense of being watched that he hadn't felt since living in the city. He shook it off. "It's almost Halloween," he told himself. People get weird. It's not the city. Let it go." After a long moment, the kid turned with a slow, deliberate motion and walked back into the woods. As Halloween drew closer, a strange shift occurred. The cheerful, store-bought decorations on their neighbors' houses, the smiling ghosts and friendly witches, began to disappear. They were replaced by bundles of corn husks tied to streetlights and strange rustic symbols painted on mailboxes. And they started seeing more of the horse heads. One afternoon at the park, they saw a group of them. They didn't laugh or shout. They moved with an odd, almost choreographed grace, taking strange, trotting steps, their plastic hooves making a dry, clicking sound on the pavement. The happy sounds of a normal playground were absent, replaced by an eerie, watchful silence. "That's not right, Jamie," Sarah whispered, pulling Lily a little closer. "They don't even talk." When Jamie mentioned the masks to Mr. Henderson, the neighbor's friendly smile didn't waver, but his eyes were sharp, analytical. "It's all part of our fall festival," he said, his gaze fixed on Jamie's reaction. "A long-standing local tradition. We believe it shows a strong community spirit when everyone participates." The words, meant to be reassuring, felt like a veiled instruction. The week before Halloween, the fall festival began in earnest, and it was clear Jamie's family was being watched. The masked townspeople would fall silent as they passed, their plastic horse heads turning in unison. The feeling of being welcomed had been replaced by a feeling of being constantly evaluated. Lily, in her astronaut helmet, was met with stony silence from the other children. One of them whispered the word "outsider" before trotting away. They were failing the test, though they didn't yet know they were being graded. On Halloween night, the test reached its climax. At each house, 2 candy bowls were presented. The horse-headed children received handfuls of the best candy. Lily, in her astronaut suit, was offered the other, smaller bowl, from which she received a single cheap lollipop. Her initial excitement faded into a quiet hurt. For Jamie, watching this deliberate exclusion was a slow, burning torture. Across the street, he saw Mr. Henderson watching them, his expression one of calm, clinical assessment. The friendliness was gone, replaced by a cold, silent judgment. They had failed. That night, Jamie called his old friend Alex, a data mining genius from his Silicon Valley days. An hour later, Alex called back. "You need to leave," he said, his voice grim. "I found the town's original charter from the 1920s. It's basically a eugenics manifesto. It talks about community purity, preserving heritage, and creating a perfected society. The founders were obsessed with creating a master race. Blonde hair, blue eyes, that whole horrifying deal." Alex continued, "I cross-referenced property records going back 50 years. Every family that has successfully stayed in that town fits a very specific demographic profile. The ones who didn't, they all sold their homes for a loss and left right after Halloween. You guys were never being welcomed. You were being vetted." The truth crashed down on Jamie. It was all a test. Mr. Henderson's questions, the masks, the festival. It was a series of trials designed to gauge their willingness to conform to the town's twisted ideals. When they showed confusion instead of acceptance, they failed. The escalating psychological pressure was the town's way of forcing out the impure. The kindness had been the bait, and the festival was the final exam. He looked at Sarah, who had been listening on speaker, her face a pale mask of horror. She was already on her feet, pulling a suitcase from the closet. Their previous home had been a fully furnished apartment, so the house was still sparse, easy to walk away from. They grabbed their daughter from her bed, their bags, and a few essentials. They got in the truck and drove. leaving behind the house they had believed would be their forever home. As they passed the town line, Jamie saw a figure standing at the side of the road. It was an old man in a tattered horsehead mask. He wasn't trotting. He was just standing there watching them go. At his feet was a single jack-o'-lantern, its face a simple hollowed-out hole, as vacant and soulless as the mask itself. In his hand, the man held a single plastic horse hoof, and he knocked it slowly, deliberately, against the wooden welcome sign. A hollow, echoing sound like a final, silent dismissal. A monster of a house stood at the end of a long driveway, a giant new build with too many windows and more rooms than any family could ever need. Music hammered from inside, its bass vibrating through the driveway pavement. Sounds of 100 conversations spilled out from an open front door, mixing with a sharp smell of spilled beer and fallen autumn leaves. Inside, it was even louder. A dense crowd of costumes and sweating bodies moved under spinning party lights. Jessica, dressed as a clunky Frankenstein, had already had a few drinks and was feeling a warm, easy buzz. Her friend Kyle was supposed to be her ride home. He was somewhere in the chaos, dressed in a simple black skeleton onesie. They were a funny pair. For the first hour, everything was fine. Jessica got separated from Kyle almost immediately, swallowed up by a sea of people. She navigated her way to the kitchen, grabbed another plastic cup of cheap beer, and just enjoyed the energy of the party. It was a good night. A little while later, she spotted him. Kyle was leaning against the kitchen island, wearing the same black skeleton onesie, a dark cup in his hand. He didn't look at her when she walked up, just gave a single slow nod. He gestured smoothly with his free hand toward a 2-liter bottle of soda on the counter. She poured some into her cup, and when she turned to thank him, he was already gone, lost back in the crowd. Night wore on. Music seemed to get louder, its bass a constant physical presence that you could feel in your teeth. Jessica saw him several more times. Once he was standing at an edge of the living room, perfectly still, just watching the dancers. Another time he was in a hallway, leaning against a wall, holding that same dark cup. He never waved. He never smiled. When she caught his eye, he would just stare back, his face blank under dim lights. She tried to walk over to him once, but by the time she pushed through people, he wasn't there. It was weird, but she figured he was just drunker than he'd let on. She shrugged it off and went back to the party. Fun started to fade after what felt like hours. Beer was making her tired, and her feet hurt. It was time to go home. She started her search, scanning a thinning crowd for that familiar black skeleton onesie. She finally found him near a back door. His shoulders slumped as he stared out the glass into a dark backyard. She walked up and tapped his shoulder. He turned around, and for a second his eyes looked completely empty under the party lights. She didn't think anything of it. She just pointed toward the front of the house. "Ready to go?" she asked. He gave that same slow nod, then pointed a finger toward the street and started walking. He didn't wait for her. Night air felt cold and clean after the stuffy heat of the party. Their walk was quiet. Only one sound broke the silence, the crunch of their shoes on dry leaves scattered across the sidewalk, a scraping sound that seemed to echo in the quiet. Jessica, feeling happy and drunk, didn't seem to notice his silence. She chattered on about her plans to make a hot pocket and put crushed Oreos on top of it when she got home. She leaned her head on his shoulder as they walked, completely at ease, just happy to be heading home with her friend. They reached her house, a dark shape at the end of the street. He walked her right up to her front door and stopped, turning to face her. He held out his arms for a hug. She leaned in and wrapped her arms around him. His body was stiff and strangely cold, like he had been standing outside for hours. He didn't hug her back. She pulled away and gave him a small, tired smile. He didn't smile back. He just turned, opened her front door for her. And then her world went black. Jessica woke up to a sound. A loud, rhythmic pounding seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. Sunlight stabbed at her eyes through the living room window. Her head throbbed with a dull, heavy pain. She was on her couch. Pounding came again, and she realized it was her front door. She pushed herself up, her whole body aching, and stumbled across the room. She pulled the door open and squinted. It was Kyle, real Kyle, holding a coffee and a box of donuts. He was wearing jeans and a hoodie, not a skeleton onesie. His face was a mix of confusion and relief. "Where did you go last night?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. "I looked everywhere for you." Jessica's blood ran cold. Her tired brain couldn't make sense of it. She pointed a shaky finger from him, back to herself. "You walked me home," she said, her own voice barely a whisper. Kyle's brow furrowed. He shook his head slowly, a clear no. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and showed her the screen. He had her contact page open. He pointed to a list of recent calls. There was nothing. He had tried calling her a dozen times after he couldn't find her at the party. No answer. Jessica stared at his phone, then back at his worried face, a sudden, sharp panic cutting through her hangover. Her keys. Her hands slapped against her pockets, searching frantically. They were gone. Her eyes shot down to the floor where the muddy footprints gave their silent testimony. A total stranger had walked her home, hugged her, and brought her inside. And now, somewhere out there, that stranger had her keys to her car and to her house. She had no idea who he was and no way of knowing if he was planning to stalk her, to watch her, or to one day come back. It was a rare Halloween, the kind that feels like it belongs in a storybook. A fine, thin powder of snow had fallen, a quiet sugar dusting that coated the sidewalks and clung to the orange glow of the streetlights. The whole neighborhood was alive, not with a single party, but with a sprawling, joyful environment of celebration. Laughter from kids and parents echoed from every direction, punctuated by a chorus of cheerful trick-or-treats. The air itself smelled like a perfect autumn memory, a mix of chocolate, sugar, and the clean, sharp bite of the first cold snap. Zachary was in the middle of it all. He was in 8th grade, an age where he felt old enough to navigate the familiar streets on his own. His parents agreed, but his neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, had gently insisted on coming along. Mr. Abernathy was a fixture in the neighborhood, a quiet old man with a long, slow stride and a smile that seemed permanently etched on his face. He was a good neighbor, the kind who always had a friendly word and made you feel that the world was a steady, predictable place. To have him along felt like an extra layer of safety, a symbol of innocence and comfort walking beside him in the festive dark. For an hour, they moved through the happy, noisy crowds. The crunch of fresh snow under their boots was a constant rhythmic sound. Mr. Abernathy's cane tapped softly on the ground, a third beat in their simple rhythm. As they went from house to house, the old man pointed out different landmarks, giving Zachary little history lessons about the streets he thought he knew so well. He talked about running track right here, back when a Catholic high school with a cinder track stood where the grocery store now sat. He spoke of his 20 years in the military and his long, quiet career at the local library that followed. It was calm, gentle talk, the kind of conversation that grounds a person and makes the world feel safe and solid. They were just a few minutes from home, turning down a less crowded side street where the sounds of the neighborhood began to fade into a pleasant background hum. Mr. Abernathy had just finished a story about his time stationed in Germany. He was walking just as he had been all night, his posture unchanged, his pace steady. He didn't miss a beat, looking straight ahead as he continued his thought, his voice the same calm murmur it had been all evening. "After the military, I worked at the public library for 20-some years," he said, the words flowing as easily as any of his other stories. "I liked it, but the manager, he was a hard man. He made me feel like I was a ghost." He paused, and in the space between his words, the distant sounds of Halloween seemed to dim. He took a long, slow breath, a sound that seemed to have a physical weight to it, pressing down on Zachary's shoulders. "He would say I was just an old vet who was in his way. Made me feel like I was being slowly suffocated." Mr. Abernathy continued to speak, his voice never changing pitch, never betraying a single flicker of anger or sadness. He described with simple clarity how the man's casual cruelty had eaten away at him, day after day. Zachary kept walking beside him, his own feet suddenly feeling heavy and strange. He was frozen, not by fear, but by a deep and chilling confusion. The man beside him, the one who smelled faintly of old paper and wintergreen, was talking about something far darker than history lessons. He was having such a good time just a moment ago, and his brain couldn't quite catch up. He didn't believe it, couldn't believe it. This was Mr. Abernathy, the kind old man he'd known for years. Then Mr. Abernathy's eyes met Zachary's. They were still distant, still devoid of any discernible emotion, but the sudden shift to direct eye contact sent a jolt through the boy's entire body. The old man's voice dropped to a gentle whisper, a soft exhalation on the cold air that carried words that would follow Zachary home for the rest of his life. "I killed him," he said. The words landed in the air and created a new kind of silence. The distant, happy noises of the neighborhood were still there, but they were a world away now. In the vacuum left by those two words, the only sound was the faint crunch of their boots in the snow. "I poisoned his lunch," Mr. Abernathy went on, his gaze returning to the path ahead. "When he got sick, I stayed behind to finish the shift. Once it got dark, I took his body, wrapped it in a tarp, and drove down to the local river. I threw him in and watched him sink." He spoke with no shame, no guilt. The act was just another fact of his life, a story he was telling, just like his time in the army or his job at the library. He said he just wanted to confess it before he died, as he knew he didn't have much time left. Zachary walked the rest of the way home in a state of stunned, hollow shock. He was completely zoned in, hyper-aware of everything and yet unable to process any of it. The snow-covered streets, which had looked so beautiful just minutes before, now seemed grotesque and menacing. The warm glow of jack-o'-lanterns no longer looked cheerful. They were mocking, leering eyes. The distant shouts of "trick or treat," no longer joyful. They were just background noise, a terrible, meaningless secret being yelled into the wind. The candy in his bag felt like lead. He kept his eyes on the ground, unable to look at the man walking beside him. Mr. Abernathy was still calm, his pace unchanged, the tap of his cane just as normal as it had been all night. He had a strange, contented look on his face now. Zachary felt a deep, profound unease, not because he felt he was in danger, but because of how little had changed. The kind man he knew was still there, but so was the murderer. The two had simply merged into one, an unanswerable walking question. As they reached Mr. Abernathy's driveway, the old man stopped. His purpose fulfilled, he turned to Zachary and offered a final wave. It was a friendly gesture, the simple wave of a kind neighbor on a snowy Halloween night. But Zachary knew better. He knew it was the wave of a ghost. He gave a short, numb nod in return and walked into his own home, the weight of the old man's story, a cold, heavy presence that the warmth of the house could not touch. It would be a week before he told the police, a week in which the confession echoed in every quiet moment, long after the old man had already died.